Good afternoon. We'll call this meeting of Game Fishing Parks to order. We're exactly right on time, I think, there, Senator. So I think we're right on time. But as we usually do, we'll open our meeting with a word of prayer, and we've asked Representative Scott if he would open us with a word of prayer.
All right, let's pray. Lord Jesus, we thank you for your love for us, and we pray that your name would be honored and glorified today as we have this meeting. We pray this in your name. Amen.
Thank you, Martin. Appreciate that. I know a lot of pastors could take a lesson from that prayer. It was to the point and timely. Appreciate it. Well, today we're here to discuss SB 360 from Senator Wilkinson. We appreciate all of you that are in attendance. We would invite you, if you would like to speak, if you have not signed up. There is a sign-up sheet. We'll make that available to you. If you're not on it now, you can communicate that, and we'll make it available. At this time, we'll hear from Senator Wilkinson and on the proposition, and we'll ask you to come up to the mic, Senator, and speak to us and tell us what I think you got to come around that way. You and I might have been able to go through that way at one time, but I don't know if we can do that anymore or not. Let's make sure I have your mic on. I think I do.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you today and speak to you about this bill concerning tilapia. Senate Bill 360. This would include certain species of tilapia as domestic fish as opposed to exotic fish. As you know, currently they are classified as exotic. This bill would allow them to be stocked in private ponds. It would also make it illegal to use tilapia as live bait to help prevent their introduction into ponds where the owner did not wish them to be introduced. Tilapia, of course, are efficient and a low-cost means of controlling algae in ponds. They're a food for bass, and there have been a lot of trophy bass produced in ponds where tilapia has been stocked. Also, already it's legal to stock tilapia in ponds in South Carolina and Alabama. So they already have access to the Chattahoochee River Basin and the Savannah River Basin. Now, a few people, since this bill was introduced, a few people have asked me how I came upon such an interest in tilapia. In fact, I've asked myself that a couple of times tonight.
We all understand that feeling sometimes, Senator.
Okay. But, you know, when I came to the Senate, and this is my first session, I did talk to some of the other signers of this bill, the President Pro Tem of the Senate and the Chairman of the Natural Resources Committee, and I did have a little background with tilapia because at the time of my retirement a couple of years ago, I was the program manager for the agriculture education program in the state, and we got about 275 departments around the state, and even some of those in North Georgia. They do grow tilapia as part of their aquaculture program, and if you go to restaurants, you know that tilapia is a fish that seems to be gaining in popularity. And as I began to look at this, I know some of the reservations that we're going to hear from people today, and I respect that, but they're concerned about the introduction of the tilapia into the rivers and streams in our state. Of course, I know all of you have probably looked at some of the memos and looked at some of the information, and you do know that they probably won't grow year-round in the northern part of the state because the temperature in the water would be too cold. And of course, before I did introduce this bill, I did talk to the personnel from the Department of Natural Resources. They assured me that they were okay with it. Now, as you also know, there are several species of tilapia, and this bill only applies to 3 species of tilapia. There is another, the blue tilapia, which have been a problem, I think, in Florida, and they would not be included in this bill. But again, I won't take a lot more time. I know there's some other people that have some things they'd like to say, but I guess just to summarize, they do make good food for bass. They do clean up the algae in the ponds. They are already legal in South Carolina and Alabama, so they have access to the Chattahoochee and the Savannah River already, and I do think that they bring a lot of positive things to the table, so no pun intended. So with that, I'll answer any questions that you might have.
Senator, there's several questions. I want to ask you one first, if I may. With your experience in the vocational ag world, when they were raising those fish in those containers, I think in those tanks, what kind of experience did you have? What did you see as far as the survivability in those tanks, or were they all harvested when they were at the appropriate weight?
The survivability was good in the majority of them. Of course, if you had some of the teachers that left over spring break and didn't take care of them or whatever, I guess it's like a lot of other things, but maybe some similarities between catfish and other fish that are farmed and grown as crops and those kind of things. But overall, they had a lot of good success in that environment.
Thank you. Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of questions, Senator. And having been born and raised in southeast Georgia, I was relatively young when they assured us that this thing they were experimenting with in Atlanta would help erosion.
You want to be talking about kudzu?
Yes.
Okay.
We were assured that it was going to be no problem.
Well, look at this. I played football in the Kudzu Bowl in East Denali in northeast Georgia, so it's all, you may not know, but it's already gotten up there.
And I'm sure it'll go further.
Okay.
And I've got some concerns about bringing them into ponds, and I heard you address it. I just needed a little more. You know, the transfer, not using them as bait fish, that's one thing. But when I was a little boy, too, in southeast Georgia, we used to think it rained fish. Because after every rain storm, I could find fish in the ditches. And we said, boy, it rains fish. Of course, they hitched a ride on the legs of different birds that we had in the area. Now, I know these fellows are going to learn how to hitchhike in a hurry. And they'll be moving around. I'm concerned about that because I know this is selfish on my part. But see, if I had my brothers, it wouldn't be any pond-raised shrimp because people don't get to eat enough of real shrimp from the coast because of these phonies that are all the same size and are raised all over the world now. Tell me what happens if this fish later becomes a predator like that carp up in Lake Erie, is it? It jumps out the river and knocks people boats over and eats everything that's not growing.
I think I saw that movie.
Yeah, well, it's a real movie.
Yeah, I know, and I know that's a very serious concern. And of course, I can assure you, I don't want my legacy in the state Senate to be that I was the person that introduced something like. No, I don't want that to be my legacy in the state Senate. And so, when I questioned the Department of Natural Resources about that. We had a memo from the Department of Natural Resources. Did all of you get a copy of that memo? You didn't? Okay. I think I may. That might help some, but I know I shared some of that with Chairman Burns. But I guess the only thing I could say to that, Representative, it's just, of course, it's hard to predict what's going to happen for sure. We all know that you have these studies and you're assured, and then once they're out of the gate, you know they're out of the gate. I guess when I was looking at it, I kind of looked at the experience in Alabama and the experience in South Carolina, and they haven't had a real negative experience. And obviously, just the way you were talking about the fish being transferred that same way, you know if they're in Alabama and if they're in South Carolina, you know that they already have the potential to be in Georgia. So that it has not been a problem like that in those states at this point. So that I would not anticipate that it would be.
What else, Representative Williams? That's all right now?
That's it right now.
I'm glad to know you're old enough to know when it used to rain in South Georgia, enough to have water in the ditches and all those kind of things. Representative Jaspers. Silas, we have. How many did you have there, Senator? I was going to get some. You got several. See how many. If we don't have enough, I can get you to go make some more, if you will.
Senator, just a couple of quick questions. You know, where it talks about private ponds, I've got my question is kind of two-part, because agricultural in nature. Could these ponds be thought of as production ponds too? Just like we have out in southern Alabama, we grow catfish and tilapia. This would allow that to be done in Georgia also.
It would. It would.
And wouldn't that just be a great alternative crop for catfish producers who are growing catfish now, the market's up and down, allow them another different thing they could use?
That'd be my thought. See, I really thought this is a jobs bill. It now, in all seriousness, it could produce some income and more jobs for farmers.
Do you scale them or skin them? Go ahead, Representative.
But that's the point I'm trying to make, is that this does allow the expansion of our catfish industry, or let it grow some,
Yeah.
which it certainly needs.
It does.
Thank you.
Representative Donahue.
Is it not true we already have tilapia in Seminole?
I'm
And
sure.
we do.
Okay, all right.
So we, as you said earlier, there's ponds that are around to where they have hitchhiked to certain areas in parts of Eufaula and Seminole already. One of the things, tilapia, of course, eats grass and different particles, more like that. It does grow, at certain times of the year rapidly. But, we're not talking about a huge, huge fish. And I probably missed that and apologize for it, but your main purpose when you had the thought of coming up with this bill, if you just tell me in a paragraph what inspired you on this bill?
Well, you always want to introduce bills, I think, that do good things for people. So I think when you think about tilapia, probably about three things. One thing, it's a very cost-effective, efficient means of controlling algae in ponds. Number two, they make excellent food for bass, so the bass get bigger in the ponds where they grow, and the bass like to eat them. And number three, you do have the option of growing them and farming them in ponds as a crop.
There you go. That's good enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, you mentioned that they already have the program for the tilapia in Alabama and South Carolina.
That's correct.
And how long have they been doing that there? Do you have any idea?
I can't tell you. I don't know if anyone from the Department of Natural Resources is here. They attended the Senate. Is anyone from the Department of Natural Resources here? Okay, do you know? Okay.
Thank you.
Representative Knight.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, I'm curious, sort of, where's this coming from? In other words, the need or the impetus for this to do this. As an outdoorsman and fisherman, I haven't heard a lot of I guess, push from constituents, or we've got a family pond and we're trying to manage it even had the advice of professional biologist, pond biologist, come in, and there's never been a recommendation for tilapia. Where's the push coming from this? And I know you said bass, is it a food source, not only for humans, but is it for bass? And because again, this hadn't been recommended to us, and I'm just wondering where the push is for this.
Well, of course, right now it's not legal in Georgia, so you wouldn't expect anyone to be recommending it to you as an option in Georgia when it's not legal. So, that'd be part of this bill. We're trying to make it an option in Georgia.
but one follow up, I guess. Are the biologists, like the wildlife biologists who help manage the ponds, and I know there's many across the state of Georgia, and are they pushing this? I'm just sort of curious where's this getting pushed from, or who's asking for this from that perspective?
Well, I've heard from some people who would like to have the opportunity to grow them in their ponds and harvest them the same way that you grow catfish. And I know that's accurate what you say, that it's not a recommendation now, but it's not an option they have. Of course, I'm sure you go out to eat a good bit, and I'm sure you've noticed if you go to restaurants that there aren't very, very many restaurants that don't have tilapia on their menu. And when I go to my doctor, the one I go to tells me I need to be eating more tilapia and less of red meat, which I don't know whether I agree with that or not. But I'm just saying I think the consumption of fish is going up some, and tilapia is a fish that is, that people, it seems to be popular with a lot of people. It's more popular with my wife than it is me. She's a tilapia fan.
That all represents tonight.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Representative Spencer.
Can you tell us a little bit about the tilapia industry in China, and how I guess robust that industry is compared to what we're trying to do here in Georgia?
In a word, no.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, I'm not trying to give you a short answer. You have any ideas? I just don't know. I'm sorry.
Okay. I got another question,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman. Can you tell me about the diet of tilapia? Is it the aquatic floating plants that they eat, and would they potentially compete with other species that are native and indigenous to the coast? I'm from the coast, so I'm sort of concerned about introduction into the brackish waters down there, and would they compete with other native species if they were released into the natural environment there?
Okay, now I could answer that to a certain extent, but I hate to keep asking you guys back here. Would you have an answer to that? You're probably more knowledgeable on that than I am.
Todd, let me interrupt you. Why don't you come over so we can get you on the camera? We always glad to have you with us.
They will eat more than just vegetation, but they are primarily vegetation eaters. The other species that people use for that kind of work are grass carp. With the focused difference between grass carp and tilapia being that grass carp are more eat more vegetation. It's actually growing to the ground like hydrilla, those types of things. Whereas tilapia on the free-floating stuff, the filamentous algae and the duckweeds and things like that are free-floating, and that's kind of why people pick one or the other based on which they're trying to deal with.
Now, do manatees have the same diet profile as...
Manatees are vegetarian, but you just went outside my area of expertise.
Okay, all right. And one more question. Is it true that they could live in brackish waters?
The blue tilapia that is not included here, and that is the one, by the way, that's somewhat in Seminole, does have a fairly high tolerance for brackish water. Nile somewhat, but not as much. Neither one of them survive at sea strength. So it just depends on how much salt's in the water.
Why don't you it's working pretty good now, Senator.
I was trying to.
I think all of y'all are familiar with Deputy Commissioner Holbrook, but we appreciate his comments. Do you mind holding on and helping us a little bit more?
Certainly.
Representative Donahue.
How big in weight and size are the tilapia we're talking about going to grow to?
You know, I don't know what the upper limit for them. They're generally sort of smallish kind of fish.
What I understood is somewhere between the 3-4 pound range, but
I think
as we're
smaller
talking
than
about
that
blue
typically.
and different type tilapia, just curious, if it can grow up to an 8-pounder or.
I can't address that. I do not know, but I'll see what I can find out before this gets out, what the precise limit on those fish are. I mean, they do grow them. Some people do use them for bass food, so
Right.
it can't get so big and actually be useful that way.
Depends how big the bass is, huh?
That's right.
The bass that I catch could not eat that size of tilapia.
Representative Jasper.
Just real quick, technical question. Did I understand you say this, that they're good at controlling duckweed?
Duckweed is one of the things that people use them for, yes.
Well, you know, like duckweed is is the worst weed of small ponds in North Georgia by far. I mean, it absolutely covers them throughout the summer. I mean, could we is it a point to make that would help give us an option? There is no chemical or any option of controlling that weed in our ponds right now.
I don't know about all the options that might be available for controlling duckweed.
There's no chemical. I mean,
it can be problematic, but it's one of the things that tilapia eat. Now, how effective they are,
Yeah.
I can't tell you.
Okay.
I mean, if you don't get the stocking rates right and everything else, it can be as ineffective as anything else.
Just know, years ago when we brought in the tetraploid grass carp into, it was very regulated, as you know. I mean, can you see us doing something like this with a tilapia for a weed control measure?
It is one of the reasons why you would do that. Grass carp can be very effective or not effective depending upon the situation,
Sure.
but it is an extra tool.
Okay.
And grass carp certainly have been effective in certain settings
Okay.
for controlling weeds.
Thank you.
Representative Allison.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'm reading over your little letter here from the Wildlife Resource Division, and I guess I'll just ask you the question I want to know. Where's DNR in this? Do you support this? Do you not support this?
DNR is neutral on this. We see the risk is pretty low, and we did not see a reason. If we thought the risk were high, we'd be screaming that we think there's a problem here in terms of escaped exotics.
But in the final,
But I
in the
can't-
final paragraph, I'm a lawyer, so I look at things like this. Final paragraph, you made sure you let us know there is a risk.
You can't take the risk out of it, and certainly I think that the biggest issues, certainly South Georgia and springs that mitigate water temperatures, have an impact on that.
I'm in a district that has heavyweight sports fishermen, and I've heard from many of them that have great concerns about this, and they were asking me to basically ask you where y'all were in this. So you're just going to take a neutral stance and say it has a risk, it doesn't have a risk. Legislature, do what you want.
It has
That's how I'm feeling it. There is a risk, but it's not a substantial risk. But
I think you've assessed it correctly, the way we feel about it.
I'm a lawyer. I obfuscate for a living, so I'm just making sure that's what we're doing.
I can't say no risk. It certainly is not an option. And as if global warming is going to do what some of the models say it's going to do, then certainly the risk climb with something like that. But,
I appreciate your candor.
all right.
Representative Williams, are you back on?
Yes, sir. I thank my lawyer friend for lawyering it up there. Yes, a couple of questions are very interesting to me. And Todd, as Deputy Commissioner, you've been around since I've been here, before I got here, and I've got great respect for you. And part of my respect is because you've always been a straight shooter, and you're good at what you do. And it bothers me when there's so many questions that we don't have an answer to right now about this fish. That the mystique is good some places. I'm worried about it in our streams. And that small doubt there that makes you be neutral scares me, because 7, 8 years from now, if we have problems, well, we told you there was risk, and, I'm afraid of the risk. Now, I haven't got a hard opinion on this. I won't do anything that'll help Georgia. But like Representative Spencer, we live on the coast. Pristine, but a delicate balance. I don't want to see anything that throws it out of kilter. Now, if this fish is non-invasive and doesn't have any real problems, and I don't have a problem with it, but some of the unanswered questions gives me reason for pause. I'll be very, very, very frank with you. And I'd rather err on the side of caution. Now, I'm still not against this bill, but I'm nervous about the long-term consequences. I just wanted to bring that up. Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to go on record with that.
Caution's always a good place to be when dealing with biological systems.
Thank you, Representative Williams. Representative Bruce.
If you've already answered this, I apologize, but you said minimal risk, but what is that? What are the risks?
I can't quantify what minimal is. There have been significant studies and research, and when the water temperatures get, say, below the mid-40s, and that's Fahrenheit, you're going to have almost no survival. So what you're going to typically deal with is certain years. Some of these species that are in this bill will survive, maybe half of them.
Okay,
but there's going to be other years that come along that'll be cold enough. If you ask me after this year, well, shoot, yes, you're going to get some survival. After the winter we had the year before last, you're going to have most of them.
Okay, so the risk that you're talking about is to the survival of the fish, not to the environment or the area in which
survival of the fish in an escaped situation really is where potential risks come to the environment. If you got a weed-eating fish that is persistent, if we were in Florida and having this conversation, we'd be having a very different conversation right now. I have no doubt that they present real risk at those temperatures. But here, it looks like there's going to be years that come along that's going to cut the feet, if you'll pardon the expression, out from under the tilapia just because of cold temperatures. And, you know, if you do that, you might have persistent fish for a couple of years, and then, boom, the population is going to crash because of cold temperatures if you get an escape situation. And that's specifically why, you know, we've made some comments relative to blue tilapia. They're much more cold tolerant, and we don't have that same comfort level with them. But it certainly is not a risk-free situation.
And I don't know if this is true, but someone told me that this was like akin to the piranha. Is that correct?
No, sir.
That's not? Okay. All right. No, not akin, like equal to it, but like a relative of.
No, not.
All right. Okay.
Roger, you have to pull these things' teeth before you turn them loose, so you don't have to worry about them.
No, for sure, huh?
They're taxonomically, they are both fish. Okay.
Mr. Commissioner, question.
Yes, sir.
One for you. You say in Florida you would have a concern.
Yes, sir.
Which native species does that concern displace in Florida? Which is that most problematic for on the native fish of Florida?
There's actually been some indication of competition with brim, bluegill, and maybe some of the other sunfishes. I don't know all the biology or ecology behind that potential competition. There is some overlap in food, even though these things eat vegetation. They also eat a few other things, and there may be some displacement, but just by presence. I'm not sure what all those things are, but there has been some indication in the science relative to competition with the brim species.
One other question, and you as a senator may ask this. I'm going to take the chairman's prerogative right here for a second. And I'm not sure this is the proper term, but natural selection or the ability of nature to adapt. When you see a season that may not get cool enough, and you have a significant population that survives, what about the next generation and next generation? Or have you seen, do we know enough about these things to know that if they will adapt to cooler and cooler? I knew the blues were taken out because they had that. Yeah. What about the species that we've identified here, of varieties we've identified in the bill? Have you seen them adapt to lower temperatures and survive?
I can't say there's been research done over a long enough period of time to say, okay, the winter takes out 50% and it leaves the most cold hardy 50% to reproduce, and over time that would probably take a good number of years, and I don't think the research has been in place long enough to address that question.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Let's see. Representative Donahue, you have another question? You always have another question, I think.
That was the one you just asked on the brim, basically. That answered that. That was a little concern. One other thing, and answer me this. We know they pretty much would be okay, like Seminole and some lakes that they're already in. I think you said the Blues.
Blues are in there.
Okay.
Yes.
When we're spraying grass, we're told that the chemicals they spray won't hurt the fish. I've been there while they've sprayed a bunch, catching great fish, and then they come right behind me and spray. The next day I go out, and I'll see some fish floating. The fish don't bite the same. So let me ask you a question on this, where I'm going with it. All of a sudden, they say this chemical won't hurt. It's going to kill grass and kill weeds. Have we done the proper research to know that this is not going to come into the system and hurt our lakes, for sure, trout, whatever?
You mean the chemicals coming in or the fish?
No,
coming
I'm
in?
talking about the fish. I just say we say we know that certain things won't hurt, and it seems it does.
Yeah. A couple parts on that question relative to the fish sometimes dying off after chemical applications. Frequently what happens, if you have a heavy weed burden, if you kill them all at one time, this is one of the reasons why you might want to use a fish for weed control, biological control instead, right, is if you get that major die-off all at one time of vegetation, you usually get a dissolved oxygen problem, right, and it's actually the DO levels that result in a fish die-off, and that certainly can happen in a pond situation. But there has been research, some out of LSU, some out of the University of Georgia, relative to what these species can tolerate. And I just got some information while I was looking a little while ago relative to brackish water, blue tilapia, 54% survival at 20 parts, which is just under 2/3 sea strength. Nile, 81% at 20 parts, and both of them showing, I'll take that back. Blue had 54% at sea strength. Nile had 0 at sea strength. So there is some research out there. You can say, okay, under these conditions, we know what they can and can't take. Now, over time and evolution, which usually requires millennia, but not always, everybody would have said white-tailed deer couldn't have lived in an urban environment for years and years, and yet you find out they do quite well in those environments. So over time, how long that's going to take, there's no way of knowing. Thank you.
Representative Shaw. Excuse me. Yeah, go ahead. That's fine. We'll take the front row first. Sorry about that, Justin.
Commissioner, I'm just trying to get figured out. I don't know much about tilapia except what they taste like, but I know that in South Georgia, all we got to do is just block some water, and you'll have catfish. You don't even have to put them in there. You just can't kill a catfish. How tough are these tilapia? I mean, I know they're not like catfish, but I mean, as far as the eggs getting on the bird's legs and moving from here to there. Yeah. Is that possible with these?
On the toughness scale, what I really have to measure is salt tolerance and cold temperature tolerance. And relative to temperatures, when water temperatures get below the mid-40s, they're not tough at all. They can be tough in the mid to upper 40 range. In terms of spread, I think the greatest risk would be not so much bird legs, but somebody puts them in a lake and the dam breaks and you basically flush them in a very direct stocking is what results. And I think that's primarily where your risk would come in.
Yeah, but that's kind of somewhat of a small risk already just because they're in our neighboring
That's correct. It is a risk
states.
Right now.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Spencer.
I guess this is a little bit more technical. Going back to the risk assessment in Florida, I don't know what studies you've looked at as far as the impact of blue tilapia, but in medicine we do something called relative risk about how the disease is going to develop in the population. What do you do something statistically in biology that assesses a risk or an impact to certain species like that?
It would primarily be associated with certain identified environmental parameters like temperature or habitat structure or things like that, and you can test against those things. and again, the Florida example is because they're so much different in temperatures, and part of theirs being in basically tropics. There's no doubt that these species will survive in those temperatures that they offer. And we get, as we see, up to the fall line, you're going to get some survival most years, some years. You're also going to get, that doesn't help you in terms of establishing a species if you come along on the third or the fourth year and you get zero survival. It puts it all into check. And 50% survival is not good, but it does keep those things from being quite the environmental problem that other species that would actually have 100% survival.
One more question. Could you tell me the average water temperature in coastal Georgia? I guess ranging from Savannah to St. Mary's.
In the wintertime?
Yeah.
I had some of those statistics. You're probably looking in the mid 40s.
Okay.
Chairman Knight.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, I know it's been stated that several states have them around us. How long, in other words, what is the history of that? Is it 20 years? Is it 5 years?
I really don't know how long that's been legal in South Carolina and Alabama.
Okay.
Whether that's been long enough to actually expose you to the risk, I can't answer.
That's where I'm going with that is can we get a risk assessment from a long period of time that maybe a neighboring similar state?
I can certainly get some research done and find out how long they've had it and get that information to you, but I do not have it today.
Thank you.
If in fact we were to accept this proposition to reduce the risk of this escape, I think with the carp, you use some sort of radiation to maybe sterilize the fish before you release them.
They're
and also,
triploid,
let me, two questions while you answer both of them, save you. And also, in some of the information that Senator provided, there was also something that I had not seen before, where you only released a male or a female. And primarily, I think in this it said just the release of males to cut down on the opportunity that something could move on from there. How about comment on those two?
You're probably more likely to have, with this species, I think, in the arena of sex identification. I don't know what the genetics research and potential is for that. But I will say this: it's very hard to get 100% on the gender. And as an example, we only stock female largemouth bass in the Okmulgee PFA, but we couldn't get all the others out of the system before we did that. I mean, there's just almost no way to do that. So eventually, while you could slow it down, I think you're ultimately going to have to live with those risks, even with some of those kinds of steps. That your real preventative, your real reduction in risk associated with this really falls on the shoulders of temperature and where we are. And if that is not what people are comfortable with, then I think your course is clear. And if it is, then you can probably have some discussions on whether something like this should go forward. Temperature is really the dividing line here.
I think you've stated that very well. Thank you, Commissioner Holbrook. We appreciate it. Senator, you can wrap up now. We're going to have some other speakers, and you can wrap up now, or you can come back after we hear some other speakers.
Okay.
It's your pleasure.
I can assure you this. I know you appreciate Commissioner Holbrook being here this afternoon, but nobody appreciates it any more than I do. And about all I'd want to say, because I've told you about everything I had, I do want to say to you, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate you taking the time to schedule this hearing and all the rest of you for being here and asking these questions, because I know this is a busy time, and I just want to thank all of you for being here and listening attentively this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. You're certainly welcome. I would be remiss if I didn't thank the members of this committee. We are busy, and thank you all for showing up to examine thoroughly this really important piece of legislation that can have a tremendous effect. We have 4 people signed up, and I know we want to hear from all 4 of you, and we also want, I know our members have some other places they have to be, so I want to ask you to hold it at a max of 5 minutes, and we're going to start with you, Jerry McCullum. if you don't mind, come on up, start things off with the Georgia Wildlife Federation. We appreciate you being here, and we look forward to hearing your perspective on this issue. Ladies and gentlemen of the committee, we will take some questions. And Representative Tankersley, we appreciate you coming and trying out, auditioning for this committee. If in fact some of us come back next year, we'll consider you for membership. I can assure you of that. We know of your great love for the outdoors. Jerry McCollum, I'll let you introduce yourself. Make sure it gets done exactly right. I won't do you like you did Sam last time I tried to introduce him when you scribbled his name out there and I couldn't read the name. So we'll let you do the same. Jerry.
I appreciate being here, Mr. Chairman, and I apologize for my handwriting. I learned it like everybody else. I'm Jerry McCollum. I'm the CEO of the Georgia Wildlife Federation. I'm trained as a wildlife biologist. I'm third certified by the Wildlife Society. I am not a fisheries biologist. Like my old friend Todd, we are both wildlife biologists, and so we have to get involved in fish a lot of times, and the water gets deep pretty fast. But I do have some comments for you. The Georgia Wildlife Federation and its board of directors have looked at this proposal in depth, and we resoundingly say that it ought not to go forward. We are opposed to this bill in any form that we might imagine that it even would get modified to as it now stands. Just so you know, on my board of directors, I probably have 350 years of collective service in fisheries, wildlife, and forest professionals, and one of whom is a PhD fisheries scientist got his degree at Michigan and teaches here in Georgia. And he grew tilapia in his laboratory for his PhD work, and his personal communications to me over this week was that in the second generation of tilapia grown in his lab, and these were the Mozambique tilapia, that's one of the species approved here in this bill, that they increase their tolerance of temperatures by 10 to 15 degrees in the second generation in the laboratory. That enough it ought to give us some reason to be concerned. Two or three things that have been mentioned that I'd like to cover first, and I have some more details before you sound the bell there. Tilapia is not a vegetarian. The tilapia is an omnivore, which means they'll eat anything they can get in their mouth. And they are, in that regard, precisely like a lot of the brim in our state. The bluegill, for example, is a vegetarian. In fact, if you know, we've stocked ponds with brim. We always stock ponds with brim in the fall and let them go through the winter and spawn. Then you put the bass in the spring where the bass will have something to eat. Well, what the theory behind that is that the bluegill have been feeding on this floating algae all winter. And so they are vegetarians in that regard, bluegill. But if you go fishing for a bluegill, I advise you don't take a chunk of broccoli. You take some crickets or some worms or something else, because you will not catch them on broccoli. Okay? Now, if they're coming up the Seminole, they're doing a lousy job, because if you fish the Seminole the way I do, you go looking for a pothole somewhere where there's a big bass laying in there. If you know how to fish the Seminole, you'll catch a lot of fish. But if you just go out there and you don't know it, most of what you'll be doing is pulling the weeds off your propeller. So the Seminole is not a good place to talk about a weed control fish. Nutritionally, this is easy to find on the internet. The nutritional value of tilapia, which is loaded with omega-6. Omega-3 is what's good for you. Omega-6 makes the tilapia, a good fillet of tilapia, is about equal nutritionally to a double cheeseburger, French fries, and a milkshake. It is the fattest of fat. Why would you think that somebody would say this will grow a big bass? It's because it's the fattest fat that we know. These fish will survive on their own excrement. Little tilapia, like, let me say it this way. If we say brim, if I hand you a brim, you'd know it's a brim, every one of you. But you know, there's about 15 or 20 species of brim in our state. The red-eared, the long-eared, the short-eared, the red-breast, the bluegill. And so that's how we're using this word tilapia. When they're small, they all look alike. You're not going to segregate females from males. You're not going to segregate the blues from the Mozambique and the others, the Nile. You're going to have a bucket full of tilapia. You're going to put them in your pond, and shortly you're going to displace native fish. Just a few years, that pond's going to wash over. We know this happens. Every flood, it'll wash over, and you'll wind up with these fish in the rivers. We got a guy in Athens right now just dying to get some tilapia for his farm pond. And this farm pond is on a little branch that runs straight to the Oconee River. The first time that floods, overruns through his design spillway, any other way, or a bird jumps from here over there with some eggs, that tilapia is in the Oconee, which means it's in the Altamaha. And that is to the state of Georgia the same way that Mississippi is to the United States of America, in the Altamaha. Am I done?
What I'd ask you to do, if you could go ahead and finish up, and I want to have one more speaker. That'll be half the speakers, because we have some members who have to leave, and
Yes,
maybe
sir.
get a couple of questions for the first two of you in from those members before they leave, and then we'll move on.
I'll wrap it up with this. If we should do something like this, with the kind of testimony we just heard from one of the best natural resource management agencies in the world, that there is a risk, we don't know what it is, we ought to study this thing. And a study would be at least a 5-year study. So I'll wrap up with that. Thank you. And I want to say it's a pleasure being able to talk to this entire committee. Thank you. Only got Miss Teague missing. And she had a family tragedy.
That's right.
Well, thank you all for being here and for listening.
Jerry, I'm sure you're going to hang around for a minute in case we have a question for you. We'll let you take a seat and let
As they
Ms.
say, I'll be here till the cows come home.
I kind of figured that. Thank you, Jerry. Appreciate your information. And Ms. Neesmith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the committee allowing me to speak. I've come as a trustee of the Georgia chapter of the Nature Conservancy, but more importantly as a landowner in Georgia with multiple properties on numerous streams, including the Altamaha River, the Amazon of America, and the Flint River. I believe legislation is a lot like architecture. You ought to be able to stand 25 years from now and look back and say, was that a good decision? Or what were we spoken when we built that building? Or what were we thinking when we passed that legislation? I think this is a situation where we need to ask, what are the unintended consequences of passing legislation to bring tilapia? As Jerry pointed out, who will know which variety of tilapia? I think there's too much risk there. I have an article back in Athens from the Gainesville paper that was lauding the introduction of kudzu as erosion control. Would any of you want to, that was in 1946, would any of you want to bring in kudzu today? How about Benjamin Franklin was one of the smartest men ever to live in America. He brought Chinese tallow tree to America for possible commercial value. Do your research and see what damage the popcorn tree, the Chinese tallow, is doing for our wetlands in Georgia. I'm fighting it, spending thousands of dollars each year to fight the Chinese tallow tree, which Ben Franklin thought was good. He didn't know about the unintended consequences. The DNR, and we love the DNR, but a few years ago they introduced flathead catfish. It was going to be a good thing for Georgia. We'll interview some of our South Georgians about that, what it's done to the red breast population. Well, feral hogs. I deal with feral hogs every day on our property. That's one of the most invasive things that we can have. Doing the research through the Nature Conservancy, I found out that tilapia is in the top 10 biomass aquatic invasive species in the world. I believe that we need to think about the unintended consequences of a measure like this. If you look in the Illinois River, 95% of the biomass is from Asian carp. 95% of the biomass in the Illinois River is from Asian carp. In the Altamaha, we have 90 different species of fish in the Altamaha. Imagine if we had 95% of that biomass tilapia, and that's a real possibility. So I think we need to think about the unintended consequences. I was in Costa Rica recently, and I have pictures. If you'll give me your email addresses, I'll send you pictures of 8 and 10 pound tilapia that came out of a farm pond there. So they're not little bitty guys. They can grow into big, big fish. Think about the unintended consequences. At best, we should delay and study this. Even better than that, we should just ignore this opportunity to introduce legislation like this, because I believe there are alternate possibilities that can create jobs in Georgia that would not endanger our environment. So I thank you for letting me talk to you today. Thank you.
I think it's quite obvious you're not that guy down in Athens that Jerry was referring to.
No, sir. And whenever I learned that one of their major items on the diet is feces, I don't like tilapia nearly as good as I used to.
I agree with you on that. Hold on just 1 minute. Let's see if we have.
Sure.
While we got Mr. Dink, anybody have a question? Because we lost some members there for a minute, so I don't think, is everybody okay from being here for a few?
Well, I really do appreciate it. Thank you.
And
Thank you.
I have a question for you.
Yes, sir.
How old do you think those 8 and 10 pounders were? Did you have any insight into
I
that?
understand these were put in there within the last 5 years. But if you get your email addresses, I'll be happy to send them to you. They look like flounder coming out of one of those saltwater rivers down in Camden County.
Chairman Knight does have one. I could prompt a question.
Actually, Mr. Chairman, I just had looked something up and on one of the fish biologies, and they said within a year, if it's fed properly, it can get up to 3 or 4 pounds.
Thank you. We appreciate you being here.
Thank you, and thank you for
insight.
listening. Thank you for listening.
Glad to have you. Thank you. I'll take a break here from. Does anybody have a question on the testimony that Jerry McCullough presented to us a minute ago? Okay, we're going to move on. Lindsay Holliday. Lindsay, if you hold on just 1 minute when you take the.
I did get the answer to the question I asked. I wanted in South Carolina and Georgia, and I got a response back 20 plus years.
20 plus years. South Carolina and Alabama, 20 plus years. I forget who asked that question, if they're still here or not. Excuse me, sir. I apologize for the disruption there, and we'll let Representative Pruitt get by. Mr. Holliday, if you would tell us exactly who you are, in case I didn't get everything just right, and introduce yourself, and then we'll.
I thank you for the opportunity. My name is Lindsay Holliday. I'm a dentist in Macon. Manatee. Yeah, I like the question about the piranha. Yeah, but what's interesting, my connection here is when you spoke about a jobs bill. This could be a jobs bill for my son-in-law, who he majored in fisheries at the University of Georgia, and he is thrilled with his job up at Lake Burton. He's up there at the fish hatchery raising brook trout, and he wouldn't have a job if we hadn't brought in brown trout and rainbow trout. So there's definitely a job dealing with invasive species. I don't know how much our state spends yearly dealing with all the invasive species, but I imagine it's a pretty penny. But it's a job for my son-in-law. He's taking care of my daughter.
We understand that.
Yeah. Right.
Gets that way real quick.
But I've got to be against the tilapia, even though I love to eat them. But I guess I got a hint on why they taste so good if they got as much fat in them, because we got the taste buds in our mouth. We know when we're getting rich fat food, and I love it. I love tilapia. The prayer this started off short and sweet, but we got just halfway through it, and I thought of the word stewardship. And stewardship of our creation here. I think the word is we should need caution. I think a couple of years of study are certainly in order with all the expert witnesses we've heard, cautionary tales. So I'm speaking, I hope you'll vote. I'd like to see a no vote on this bill. I'd like to see some research. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Holliday. Do you have a question for Dr. Holliday? I'd like to get your card, because I go back through Macon, I may need your services sometimes down there.
I got my Doc Holliday card here.
Before we leave here. Thank you for taking the time to come up and speak to us. Mark Woodall. I couldn't see you hiding behind the poster. Mark.
Sometimes it's good to lay low.
I understand. Tell us who you are and who you're with, Mark, and all that good stuff, and we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Mark Woodall. I'm the chairman of the executive committee of the Georgia chapter of the Sierra Club, but I'm actually here on the request of the Flint River Keeper. Gordon Rogers is our Flint River Keeper, and he was unable to be here today, and he has a lot of experience, having been the Satilla River Keeper down there in southeast Georgia, and has done quite a bit of fisheries work. Used to work for the Coastal Division of the Georgia DNR, and he wanted me to express the opposition of the Flint River Keeper and the Flint River Keeper Board and our 600 or 700 members to this legislation. As you have heard, and the research at the University of Georgia shows that these invasive fish will survive in Georgia. And as was mentioned before, we have storm events in Georgia. Those of us in the Flint River Valley remember back in '94 when Tropical Storm Alberto stalled over the Flint River Valley, and we had 20 inches of rain, and just about every farm pond in that part of the state blew out, and of course half of Albany got flooded. So these fish will survive, and they will get loose, and we feel they pose a real threat to the brim in all of our ponds across Georgia. So I would just urge y'all to err on the side of caution and hold this bill, and not follow the example of Alabama and South Carolina until we know more. I know of course, on the Flint River, the shoal bass is one of our fish. People come from all over the United States to fish for the shoal bass. The shoal bass has been pretty well exterminated in Alabama, so we don't want that to happen to our brim here in Georgia.
Thank you, Mark. Any questions for Mark? Appreciate you being here and you work with us. Thank you. Is anyone else that here with us today that needs to speak that didn't get signed up? Any questions or comments from the committee at this time? Well, with listening to the testimony today, and we certainly, it obviously is a very important issue, because I think this is one of the first times that we've had a full turnout of our committee, and I appreciate the members being here. There are some unanswered questions, possibly some unintended consequences that may come about from this proposition. In having said that, it is an important proposition, can be to our state. Senator, I think the proper posture for us at this time would be to ask you and the other folks that are interested in this bill to let's look into some of these questions, see if we can get them answered, and and maybe next year they can come back and be answered. We can talk about them again, in the negative or the positive. We have some strong feelings, and I think some on both sides of the issue, and certainly that are issues that are very pertinent to the longevity of our resource here in this state. And we, like you, want to do nothing, and I think the folks in the audience want to do nothing to leave a legacy of damaging our natural resource. And we certainly want to be cautious in that event. We want to work with DNR. Mr. Commissioner, we hope that you'll continue to work with us. We would like maybe to even sit down and talk a little bit about maybe running something at one of our hatcheries to come back and do some temperature controls and see, really get a firm handle on this issue. But at this point in time, I think what we'll do is we'll just table this issue for this year, and if it comes back next year, we'll give it proper consideration. We appreciate all of you being here and being vigilant, and we just thank you, and if nothing from the committee, we will be adjourned. Thank you.